The New Deal wasn't just about restoring what had been lost in the Great Depression, but in pointing private capital towards new places to invest in the future for America. Now consider the aerospace industry. It languished in the 1930s. It was still run mostly seemingly like out of garages, like an early automobile company. And it was still pretty cutting edge, so that we think of aerospace and planes as inevitable today. It's how we get around. But in the 1930s, it was still pretty crazy. Only 10 years earlier, Charles Lindbergh had flown across the Atlantic, and it was a time of celebration of him and his heroic triumph. Similarly today, 10 years ago, the Spaceship One flew into orbit. Now, I am not flying around in spaceships today to get to Los Angeles. This is exactly how you should think about planes in the late 1930s. So when Roosevelt called for an increase in the production of planes, 60,000, 120,000, to fight in World War II, it was similar to exhorting Americans to build 100,000 space planes today. American aerospace companies were not capable of producing that many planes. They were not capable of producing that many planes because there was not really an American industry. For instance, to put it in perspective, the candy manufacturing industry was bigger than American aerospace. Now, while that was true, there was also a way in which it was ready, it was ripe for development. After the crash and the economy started to come apart in the Great Depression, older industries like housing and cars and steel languished. But the new industries, like electronics and aerospace, sprung right back. Within 6 months, they were growing again, although they were still very small. And so what these industries really needed was two things. They needed a huge amount of demand, and they needed a huge amount of capital. And this is what a special program under the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, part of the New Deal, did when it set up a new quasi-public-private corporation called the Defense Plant Corporation. The Defense Plant Corporation was a mechanism by which huge amounts of capital were invested in strategic industries like electronics, aerospace, and synthetic rubber. It was a way for the economy to produce the goods that were needed for the war. So for instance, airplanes didn't need just airplane manufacturers, they also needed aluminum and magnesium. But the amount that was needed for these new kinds of planes was 10-fold, 30-fold, 60-fold what had been produced before. And so the Defense Plant Corporation set about doing two kinds of things to invest capital in these new kinds of industries. First of all, it created tax benefits, something called accelerated depreciation. Now, depreciation is when an asset just loses value over time, like you're wearing out your shoes. But the question is, how fast do your shoes wear out? This works for all kinds of things, whether they're shoes or machines or buildings. Now, the IRS had normally said it takes 20 years to wear out a factory. And this was a long time. And that depreciation, that small amount lost every year, could be deducted on their taxes. So what did the DPC do? It created accelerated depreciation benefits for corporations that said, look, you have 5 years. You have 5 years, and you can write down this asset to zero. Basically, you get it for free in 5 years. So this was a huge way to incentivize corporations to invest billions of dollars. Now, the second way was something very similar to what the government had done for the Federal Housing Administration and the Rural Electrification Administration. It provided a channel through which private investors could invest in these new industries, channeling funds that were insured so that even if money were lost in the investment, they would get their money back, as well as supplementing that with direct loans and the building of plants. So in the DPC, we see much more of the direct spending of buildings, but also these other kinds of financially oriented New Deal practices. What does this mean? It means that the government goes from providing about 5% of capital investment in 1940 to providing 67% of capital investment by 1943. What happens to aerospace? It goes from the garage to mass production in only a few years. By the end of the war, aerospace is 4 times the size of the automobile industry in America. It went from nothing to being 4 times larger than the most important industry of the 1920s. This is a tremendous reorientation of capital, that creating a space for safe investment in new bleeding-edge technologies. As important as this investment is for fighting the Nazis in World War II, it's even more important after the war. In 1938, there were 28 airfields in the entire country. During the war, over 1,000 are built. And after the war, they are turned over to civilian control. So what does this mean? It means there's now this massive industry that can move people around, but there's also a massive infrastructure to move them on, 1,000 airfields. And at the same time, it is not just the production of a new industry in the old places, like the industrial Northeast. The new kinds of engine plants and body assembly plants are built in other parts of America for strategic and political reasons, to get the votes of Congress and to make sure that bombers can't get at them from the coasts. So Oklahoma becomes a great center of engine building. Los Angeles becomes a great place for plane assembly. And so we start to see the industrialization of regions through government programs that had not happened before. So that industrialization, which had largely been confined to Chicago and the industrial Northeast, is now widespread throughout the South and the West.